Thank you very much for joining me in this episode number 15 of CloudNative.fm podcast. Today is May 13, 2021, and in this episode I am joined by Frank the Great. In this episode, we are going to take a look at a new open source project, Policy Reporter. Policy Reporter brings visibility into Kyverno policy enforcement. And in this episode, you will also learn about detecting abnormal behavior and validate compliance in your running Kubernetes workloads using Falco, a CNCF project runtime security with our guest Frank. Getting started with Falco and Kyverno Policy Reporter. So let me introduce my guest to you. Frank lives in Germany. He's working at Move Elevator located in Dresden, Germany as software engineer. His skill sets are in PHP framework Symfony, in backend environments as well as with JavaScript, TypeScript and Vue.js framework in front-end environments. He's also proficient in using different kinds of infrastructure and CI/CD tooling like Jenkins, GitHub Actions, Docker, and Kubernetes. And he has gained tremendous amount of respect for his contribution for cloud-native open source tooling of Falco Sidekick UI and Kyverno Policy Reporter. And want to see what he is up to? Follow him on Twitter, FrankJogeleit. And let's go ahead and say hi to Frank the Great and cut it over to the interview.
Right.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is CloudNative.fm podcast and this is episode number 15. And I'm really excited I am joined by Frank, and he is a software engineer at Move Elevator and also a contributor to Falco security team. And also he done a tremendous amount of effort to put out a Kyverno policy reporter. He did tremendous amount of work. I highly encourage you to check that out. But let me go to the Frank. How are you, Frank? Can you introduce yourself to our audience? And how are you?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Frank from Germany. I'm working as software engineer for Move Elevator. In my daily job, I'm working with standard web technology like PHP, JavaScript. And yeah, in my free time, I'm working in the cloud native space. I'm a contributor to Falco since February this year. I started by contributing to the Falco Sidekick and Falco Sidekick UI. I wrote a blog article about Falco and the ecosystem, and in this process I came in touch with the community, and yeah, now I'm a contributor and I'm very proud to help other people to get things started and to improve their Falco experience.
Yes, definitely. I've seen all your contribution. They are really awesome in a way that I think in the Falco, you are being the contributor of the month in the Falco security team, I think in the past. And I also seen your Kyverno work as well. So let's start talking about what the Falco is and how you get introduced to this project and what it's trying to solve. The Falco, what's Falco's Sidekick UI, and how the concept of cloud native runtime securities are.
Yeah, Falco is, as I said, a security runtime project. It's not about prevention, it's more about alerting. So Falco is a kernel module or eBPF program. You can install it how you like. And yeah, it sits on the kernel and watch your syscalls. This syscalls includes all information, what you do on your node, what Docker does, what containers does, and so on. And yeah, you can write rules, and you already get a high amount of the default rules from Falco with best practices, and yeah, many cases where access to nodes or pods maybe not so good, and it creates alerts based on these rules. These events can process by different toolings, and that is where Falco Sidekick come into play. Falco Sidekick is like a broadcaster for this event. So you can configure Falco to send events to Falco Sidekick, and Falco Sidekick has a huge amount of providers to send this alerts and events. You can use Grafana Loki, Elasticsearch, many different cloud-specific toolings for GKE or Amazon or Azure. And since this year, we also Falco Sidekick has also a side project, the Falco Sidekick UI, which is a standalone UI where you can where you can see your events and alerts in a graphic UI with dashboards and tables and graphs and so on. So
I think if the Falco is a runtime, is kind of a security things. They are doing some kind of runtime because I think you have some image vulnerabilities and container and stuff in it, and then you need to monitor your container. Is it some have root privilege access and these kind of security things? I think Falco is the best tool for that kind of stuff, and people are using that. They have a very good community around that, and I think Falco's Sidekick UI is kind to driving out some dashboard for these kind of stuff, to have some dashboard that where vulnerabilities can shown, and you can track those on Grafana, Loki, and these kind of stuff. So I think can you introduce this concept of what the container runtime security is to our audience who are listening to us, why this is important, and why in a cloud native infrastructure, why you need to have some kind of tool like Falco to be integrated in your cloud native stack?
yeah, security is a very important topic, and you have many layers of security. You have tools to scan your images before you deploy them. You have tools to prevent misconfiguration for your policies, but maybe you have some misconfiguration and you don't know about it. An attacker can access your cluster and has access to pods and images and so on, and you don't know about it. So if you don't know about it, you can do anything. So Falco helps you to detect these things. You need some mechanism to detect misbehavior and misuse of your infrastructure. And Falco, as I said, detects this access, like SSH access to a pod, like the creation of service accounts. It can also interact with the Kubernetes audit log, so you can write rules, for example, that detect Amazon credentials in the config map, so it's kind of misconfiguration. And if you notice misbehavior and misconfiguration, you can prevent it, or you can do something with this information. We have also nice articles about how to use Falco Sidekick with OpenFast and other tools to not do only detection. You can also prevent it. You detect something, and OpenFast uses a function to prevent it or to delete a pod or anything else. So it's very important to know what happens in your infrastructure, and it's very important to be able to do something against it. And yeah, that's why Falco, I think, is a very important project, and it should be a default in every production-like cluster to be able to know misbehavior.
Yes, thank you very much for explaining all these kind of details. And also, I think the runtime security is a topic of interest to everyone, because when you containerize something, then you have a virtual operating system on top of it. So they have the same capabilities that the operating system have, but now it's kind of a virtual operating system the container will try to talk about, and you have to assign some kind of a privileged access so that unauthorized user can't able to gain access to it and write some into the kernel of the virtual operating system and these kind of stuff. So in that way they can gain access to the underlying host operating system, and they can do so many things out of it. Might be to read the file system out of it, and also they can scan the images and put the vulnerable images on top of it, so they can do all kind of thing. So you have to prevent these things, and if you want to prevent these things, you have tools now available, and one of those tools that we're talking about is Falco Security. And some of the people have some very good contribution in the cloud native landscape, and Frank has done a tremendous amount of job on top of it. And also, I think you raise a topic here that Falco security can be injected to other tools as well, like OpenFast, like they can be integrated to some other tools like might be Prometheus or Grafana. So what these other tools are where Falco can integrate it with, and how to set Falco in other tools, and what are the best practices around that?
Yeah, you have many different choices, and it's a little bit how you want to interact with events. OpenFast and kubeless and things like that are tools that can react on events. You can do something. You can delete a pod. You can delete a resource at all. Then you have something to log things. Grafana Loki, Elasticsearch. It's also possible to write your events to storage like S3 from Amazon, so you can scrape them later, or you have a backup of all events that happen. It's very up to you what you do with all this information. You can use the Falco site UI to have a overview of all these events. Events have priorities, so you can differ between info events or critical events. And you can decide if you want to send critical events to chat clients like Slack or Discord. You can log info events to AWS. Or you can react to error events with kubeless. That's totally up to you, and you're very free in what tools you already have. I think that's always the best approach, to use tooling you already use, like Grafana dashboards and things like Loki and Elasticsearch. And if you need more, then you can consider what do I need and why do I need it, and then you can add additional infrastructure and tooling on top to get more out of it.
Yes, thank you very much explaining all these kind of details. And I think the next question that obvious to the people mind when they heard about new technologies, what are the ways for me to learn these new technologies? Where do I get this information from if I able to grasp those concepts? And if I am, and another question that people arose in mind, if I am expert in something, like I'm expert in Falco or Falco security, what should I do to contribute to that open source project? Where do I go and talk to the people about that? I have known these kind of things. I want to contribute that. So the two questions, the one is how to getting started with Falco, and if somebody are expert in runtime security, how do they contribute into the open source project like Falco?
My personal experience is that the best first step is get in touch with the community. The community of Falco is very great. We have a Slack channel in the Kubernetes Slack workspace. They are very friendly, very helpful, and they come every day, new people with problems, with ideas, and the community helps to create blog posts about it, to get things running, to help with problems. I think that's the best way. We have also the Falco website where you find blog posts about it, the different installation steps you can do. yeah, and to get in touch with new technology and all, a small shout out to raw code videos. They are very awesome. You find many toolings like Falco, like Kyverno, and many other things. That's a really great resource to explore new things, new technology. And to learn about Falco, the best way is to try it out. If I find a new tool which I find cool and want to use it, I do use it. I install it in my cluster, I try to get it running, I try to customize it, to extend it, and that's always a good path to learn more, because if you only read about it, you don't really learn it. You learn how to use it, but you don't use it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think now we jump our focus to around the one great thing that you did in the open source contribution is that a Kyverno policy reporter, I think. And can you introduce our audience what the Kyverno is, what the pod security policies are, and what you do try to solve the problem?
Sure. Kyverno is also a security tool, but it's another layer. While Falco is runtime security, Kyverno helps to improve your resources, your specs. You can define policies in YAML like any other resources, and you can define rules like define resource limits on your pods, like define special labels on your namespaces. You can create any policy you like with many features. You can also mutate and generate resources with Kyverno in this policy thing. So Kyverno is a admission controller, and it works as validation controller, also as mutating and generating controller. So it has three different use cases. I personally use mainly the validation part. And that helps me to be sure that my resources, my YAML files are in a format I expect. So I'm sure they have resource limits. I'm sure the namespaces have environment labels. I'm sure they don't use the latest image, for example. These are basic use cases. And Kyverno can do two different things with validation. You can audit your violations. So if you create a policy that every resource, every pod should have resource limits, then you can audit this behavior. So if you create a resource, a pod resource without resource limits and requests, then you can apply this, but you get a notification, a report about it, that this pod failed the validation. But you can apply it. If you enforce it, you already get an error when you try to apply it. So you're not able to start this pod in your cluster. This report that Kyverno creates are a CRD. This CRD is currently in an alpha stage, and they try to make it a native Kubernetes resource. So it exists a working group on the CRD, and many other tools will use it implemented, like Kubebench. Also, an adapter for Falco is planned. And this policy reports are namespace scopes. So if you have a rule about validation for resources, and you have many different namespaces, you have to check every namespace report to get the result of your validation. So if you apply a new rule, then it's very hard to find out what the state of your cluster is, how many pods you already have passed the rule or failed the rule. And Policy Reporter tried to solve this problem by creating a dashboard about this CRD. So you get standalone UI where you see also graphs, tables. You have many different filters for namespaces, single rules for categories, and so on, to find out how your policies perform and how your resources perform, how many pass rules, failed rules you have, and yeah, it gives you an overview. It also creates metrics. At the current time, Kyverno has no metrics API. It's in progress, but currently it doesn't exist. And Policy Reporter creates metrics about it, and so you're also able to integrate Kyverno and your resource reports in your monitoring solution like Grafana. So I tried to make Kyverno and these policies more visible in your cluster. So it's easier to interact with them. You can try out new policies without the trouble to enforce them directly, because if you have a misconfiguration in your policy, you can block your developers. That's not so good at all. And if you audit them first, you can watch how they perform, if they work as expected, and if they do what they should do, you can enforce them. And yeah, Policy Reporter helps to watch.
Yes, definitely. I think the whole conversation is about that you have some kind of a pod, and it has some kind of best practices that you cannot use the latest images. It's all been versioned, and also you have some kind of a security controls around it, the RBAC, and the pod has some kind of memory and CPU request, all these kind of scenarios. So who ensures that your pod are adhere to these best practices? For these kind of things, the pod security policies are in Kubernetes, and you have right now two tools for that. One is called Open Policy Agent, and that is great, but you need to learn the new language called Rego. But with the Kyverno, you don't need any new language because it's a CRD built in Kubernetes. You don't need any language. You just write a YAML in a standard, all the resources that you are familiar with, writing a YAML file, and then it integrates with those settings and check if those practices are adhered when the pod is running in production scenarios. I think Kyverno is a great tool, but on top of it, Frank has did a tremendous effort doing a great job of providing us a dashboard UI. So you can go to the UI and check what are the parts that are not adhered to best practices. So you can check on that UI, and you can also integrate with that open policy or policy reporter with Grafana as well. So you can see in the Grafana dashboard how the pods are adhering to the best practices. So I think that's what Frank is talking about today, and it's a great tool. I think you have to check that out. And it's new. I think the new version is coming up. I see you tweeted earlier. So what the newest version brings us? What are the new feature in the newer version of Kyverno Policy Reporter?
Yeah, the latest version brings its first plugin. So the state before was that Policy Reporter focused on this policy report CRD. That's a general CRD. It's not specific to Kyverno. Kyverno used this CRD as first tool in this amount, but it's a general CRD. And the new version of Policy Reporter brings its first plugin, and this plugin is Kyverno specific. So it's not about this general CRD, but it's about Kyverno policies. So you are able to not only see the result of your policies, you also have a new dashboard for Kyverno policies itself. So you see what policies are running in your cluster policies, normal policies, if they have a category, if they have a severity, and you can also view the YAML that's really running in your cluster, because Kyverno has a generate mechanism for policies. So if you define a policy for a pod, for example, then you not only create a single rule for this pod, Kyverno will create by default many other rules for things like deployment, daemon set, stateful set. So any other resource that sits on top of a pod. So you don't have to write this rule for this different resources. You define it for a pod, and Kyverno will generate the additional rules for other resources. And yeah, this new Kyverno dashboard shows you this generated rules on top of the normal rules. So yeah, you have a new Kyverno dashboard. You see all policies that are running. You see graphs about the categories and the type of your policies. So as I said, you can create mutating rules to change a resource over Kyverno. You have generate rules to generate new resources and the validation rules. You can show the YAML spec of your policies, and you see a details page for each policy you created with the validation results. So if you want to see how a single policy you created performed, you have this new details page, and you see any information you have from this policy with all passed and failed results.
Yes, what I think I learned from you that in the previous version of Policy Reporter, we have some kind of the pod. You can view the dashboard that the pod is adhere to best practices. But with Kyverno, they can inject those policies for not just pod, but for the deployment, replica set, and all the other objects inside it. So you cannot deploy the only pod in the production. You deploy deployment, replica set, and services, these kind of other objects. So Kyverno doing these kind of injection, so you can do on the default, they provide a deployment, and they can inject some kind of best practices that this deployment adhere to. And now the next version of the policy reporter for Kyverno, you can view the dashboard on deployment and other kind of new features that Kyverno is providing us by default.
Yeah, in general, it makes your policies from Kyverno visible in the policy reporter.
Yes.
That's the basic idea.
Yeah. And I think before I let you go, I think we have all the time for today. But before I let you go, what are the next cloud native tool that you try to look at in the future and do contribution out of it? And also the last topic, that how Falco and Kyverno are, why these two tools are important in cloud native stack. What do you think?
There are many cool tools that I want to try, and it's not easy to find the next one. I'm a big fan of the Ranger stack. I'm also using Ranger and features it provide like Fleet. I'm running my cluster on RKE. So the Ranger and SUSE community started K3S class, where you can learn how to running K3S, how to configure it, and how to advance it. This will be a class where I attend. So I want to learn K3S a bit better because currently I'm only using RKE. And a very new tool is Ranger Desktop, which I want to try out. That's all my next step. Contributing, I try to help more in Kyverno itself. I created some small contributions to add categories and severities to policies. So you have more abilities to group them and configure them. I also helping to update the policy report CRDs, which have a new second alpha version. And yeah, we still in the Falco community on improving the Falco sidekick UI, plan new things, improve the current state. So I think I have enough to do with the current tools I'm working on. But if I have a chance to help in other tools, I try to do it. So currently I'm open the issue on Civo, the new managed solution for K2S, where I improved the marketplace for Kyverno, where I want to improve the marketplace for Kyverno to set more configurations. So this small thing. Yeah, about your second question. Yeah, as I said, security is important. It's very important in big clusters for every company who running production workloads. And yeah, you have to ensure that every layer you have has some security mechanism. So Kyverno is a very easy, very cool tool to enforce your best practices, to enforce security rules, and it's very easy to get started with. So that's the first layer. But then you have to look what happens in your infrastructure, where access it, when it happens, what happens. And that is where Falco comes into place. And it's also easy to install. Over the Helm chart, you have a huge amount of important rules that cover a good security space. You can combine it with your audit log. So you have also a new mechanism to watch over your Kubernetes cluster itself. And it helps a lot. You find information about your infrastructure, and you can prevent it or detect it and then plan what to do. So security is very important, and you have to do something to improve it.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Frank. Really enjoyed the whole conversation with you today. And I think security is a topic that you're not even going to underestimate it in any part of your IT or cloud native life cycle or software development life cycle. Security is a big concern in this virtual world. We are talking about each other. We need to show that our traffic are encrypted by one end to the other end. For that, we need tools like Kyverno and Falco, and they are very good too. I tried it out, and they have your life so much happier and easier if you have this kind of tool. And if you don't have, you have to think about what to do in your cloud native stack. So having them give you a bit of relax, and having not give you a little more busy in your office time and these kind of stuff. So thank you, Frank. I really enjoyed the whole conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and you really gave us a very good insightful about what the Falco does, what the runtime security is, what the Kyverno is, and what the awesome tool you're providing us in the future, that is Kyverno Policy Reporter. I highly recommend you to check that out. And if you like it, store it on GitHub. That's way we provide a feedback to the Frank that he's doing great job, so he can keep up this work, and we keep him motivated in your contribution to cloud native runtime stack and these kind of stuff. Really happy, Frank, you showed up in my podcast cloudnative.fm, and hope to catch up you again in future. So everyone who are listening to us, catch out Frank on Twitter, and also check out Cloud Islamabad on Twitter as well. So I try to engage with Frank in well, so we can do a demo of live session on Falco and Kyverno in a 1 hour session, or might be a 30-minute session in Cloud Native Islamabad. So go check that out. So you'll be alerted when we have this final. So bye everyone. Stay safe wherever you are. Stay safe and stay strong.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, if you want to keep up what's going on in the cloud native ecosystem,
We have a weekly podcast show on YouTube and SoundCloud by the name of Cloud Native Islamabad. You can listen for free every single week. We try to find cloud and cloud native experts, share updates on cloud native best practices, cloud native real-world use cases, cloud native deployment patterns, cloud native deployment strategies. Topics include AKS on Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on GCP, cloud native architectures, cloud native application developments, container containerizing application, DevOps and automation, cloud native certification strategies, cloud native career tips, and more. So if that sounds awesome to you, head over to the SoundCloud and YouTube and subscribe to Cloud Native Islamabad.